Hello, and welcome to another session of Excel Programming for Clinicians with me, Donaldson Callum. In this session, I will introduce you to some of the key built-in Excel VBA functions that help us work with and manipulate dates. Now, you will find an ability to work with dates invaluable when working with clinical data. As you know, we tend to put date and timestamps on everything, from date of birth to date of death and everything in between. An understanding of how to use these functions in conjunction with everything else we've covered so far will give you all of the tools you need to work with dates in our clinical data. So specifically, we will look at the isDate function, the date function for working with just dates, and a now function for working with dates and times. We'll then look at the timer function, which lets us time how long things take. Next, we'll look at the day, month, and year functions, which give us, well, the day, month, and year. And similarly, we'll look at the hour, minute, and second functions. Next, we'll work out how to calculate the difference between two dates and how to add a specific period of time onto a given date. Okay, let's start with the isDate function. The isDate function checks an entry and returns true or false, depending on whether or not that entry is a valid date. So let's try some dates. Let's try 1st of January 1970. Is this a valid date? We can check that using the isDate function. And we pass in that value. Let's run the code and see what that looks like. And sure enough, 01/01/1970 is valid and we get back true. Let's test another date. Let's test 13/01/1970. And sure enough, 13/01/1970 is a valid date. Okay, let's try one more date. I'll copy that and comment it out and paste it below. This time, let's try 31/02. Is this a valid date? Let's run the code and see. And this time, as expected, we get false. So isDate is really useful. If somebody passes you a date, before you do any calculations on it, you should check if it is a valid date before you use it. Next, let's take a look at the date function. The date function returns today's date. Let's see how we use it. Okay, if I want to display today's date to the user, I could do something like this. Today's date is, and then I type in the Excel function called date. And that's all I need to do. Date derives whatever today's date is, and I'm concatenating that onto this string and displaying it in a message box. Let's run that and see what it looks like. And sure enough, today's date is, and it displays today's date. So what are the kind of things we can do with that? Let's comment this out. Let's declare a variable called appointment. And let's make that of type date. Let's say appointment equal to, and then what we can do is do something like this. If appointment is less than date, and remember date returns today's date, whatever that happens to be, then we can display a message to the user. So if the appointment is less than the date, that means the appointment was before today's date, then we can say this appointment date has already passed. Else, we can display a different message. Your appointment date is, and we can concatenate that on, and we have an end if. So here we're using the date function to get today's date. The appointment date could have been passed in by a user, or it could have been derived from a database or a file that's been imported. We're checking if that appointment was before today. And if it was, we alert the user that that appointment date has already passed. And if it's in the future, we remind them of the appointment date. Let's run that and see what it looks like. And so in this case, the appointment date has already passed. Next, let's take a look at the now function. The now function works a bit like the date function, but it gives you not just the date, it gives you the time as well. Let's see how we use the now function. Let's declare a variable called this minute, and that is of type date. Let's set this minute equal to the Excel function now, and let's display that in the message box. The date and time is, so we're displaying in the message box a string, the date and time is, and we're concatenating that onto our variable this minute, which has been assigned the value now. Let's run that and see what we get. So the date and time is, and you get both the date and the time. Let's do something else. Let's declare another variable called end time and make that of type date. Let's comment out this code and let's make end time equal to this minute plus 5 seconds. So with my end time set for 5 seconds after now, whatever now happens to be, I can use a do while loop to print the date and time to my immediate window. So let's do that. Let's say do while now happens to be less than end time, do something and then loop. And what I want to do is print the date and time using a now function. So while now happens to be less than end time, and I've set end time to be 5 seconds after this minute, which is equal to now. So while now happens to be less than end time, print the date and time, debug.print will print whatever you happen to put after the print. So debug.print will print, in this case now, into my immediate window. Let's test that. Now watch the immediate window as I run the function, and you will see it printing the date and time, and you can see the time incrementing for 5 seconds. And that's how we use the now function. Next, let's take a look at the timer function. The timer function is really useful for timing events. Let's see how we use it. Let's declare a variable for start time and declare that as a double. And let's declare another variable for end time as double. And finally, let's declare a variable for elapsed time also as a double. Let's set the start time equal to, and we can use the timer function to grab the start time. Let's display that start time. Let's run that and see. So the timer function returns a double that is equivalent to the current time. So let's declare a variable, dim I as integer, and for I equal to 1 to 1000. We'll just print something to the debug window, the immediate window. So while we're printing, we're introducing an artificial delay, and then let's grab the end time. Again, using the timer to assign the end time. Then we can calculate the elapsed time. And display that in the message box. Okay, so we grab the start time. We print to the debug window. And then we grab the end time and we calculate the elapsed time. Let's run that and see. So the elapsed time was 1.3 seconds, 1.3164 seconds. Next, let's take a look at the day function. The day function returns an integer equal to today's day. So, for instance, if it's the 25th of December, it will return 25. If it's the 1st of January, it will return 1. Let's see how we can make use of that. So let's declare a variable for patient date of birth as date. Now let's set patient date of birth. Let's say it's equal to 4/4/1970. We can use a message box to display the day of birth by using the day function and passing in patient date of birth. Let's run that and see what that gives us. As expected, we get 4. So the day function returns an integer equal to that day. Let's see how we can make use of that. Let's declare a variable for day of birth. Declare that as an integer. And let's set that day of birth equal to, and we'll use a day function to get that date of birth, patient date of birth. Now I want to return a nicely formatted piece of string. On the first, I want to return a piece of string that says the patient was born on the first day of the month. And if it's the second, I want to say the second day of the month, and so on and so forth. I'm going to use a select case structure to do this. I'm going to use a select case based on date of birth. Remember, it ends with an end select. And you have various cases. So if it's the 1st, or the 21st, or the 31st, I want my string to end with an ST. If it's the 2nd or 22nd, I want it to end with an ND. If it's the 3rd or the 23rd, I want it to end with an RD, and anything else would be obviously a TH. So here I want to say something like patient was born on the, and then I'll concatenate on my day of birth variable. And then I'll finish that off with an ST. Okay, so if it's the 1st, the 21st, or the 31st, I want to say patient was born on that day and then ending with an ST. If it's the 2nd or 22nd, I want to say patient was born on something ending in ND. For the 3rd and 23rd, I want RD, and anything else, I want TH. So for date of birth of the 4th of the 4th, 1970, if I've coded this correctly, I would expect it to say the patient was born on the 4th. Let's run this and see. And there we have it, the patient was born on the 4th. Let's test some other dates. Patient was born on the 1st, 2nd, and 3rd. So the day function returns an integer equal to the number of that day. Next, let's take a look at the month function. The month function works like the day function, but instead of returning an integer equal to the day, it returns an integer between 1 and 12 equal to the month. Let's see how we use that. Let's declare a variable for patient birthday. And let's declare another variable for birth month. Let's set patient birthday equal to 6th of the 6th, 1970. And let's use our month function to extract the number of the month and display it in a message box. For month, we pass in the day, which in this case is the patient's birthday, and we display that in the message box. Let's run that and see what it looks like. So we get 6 as expected. Let's declare another variable for the current month. We'll comment out this message box. Let's set our current month equal to, and we'll use the month function to extract the date from the date function. Let's also set the birth month equal to, and use the month function to extract the birth month from the patient birthday. So now we have both the current month and the patient's birth month. So we can check how many months there are between the current month and the patient birth month to see if they have a birthday coming up. Let's use an if function to say, if current month is greater than birth month, so it's not yet their birthday, and current month minus the birth month is less than or equal to, let's say, 3. Then they have a birthday coming up soon. Birthday in next few months. Else, patient ages are stated. Okay, so what are we doing here? We've declared a variable for current month, and we're using Excel's month function to extract the number of that month from Excel's date function. We're also using the month function to extract the number of the patient's birth month from their birthday. So with those two, we can check if the patient has a birthday coming up soon. We'll check if the current month is greater than the birth month, and also at the same time, if the difference between the current month and the birth month is less than or equal to 3. If it is, then they have a birthday in the next few months. If not, then their ages are stated. Let's run this and see. Patient's age is as stated, so no birthday coming up for this patient. Okay, so far we've seen the isDate, date now, timer, day, and month functions. So let's continue our exploration of date manipulation by taking a look at the year, hour, minute, second, date diff, and date add functions. Next, let's look at the year function. Let's declare a variable patient birthday, and let's set the patient birthday. And let's display the year of birth in the message box by using Excel's built-in year function and passing in the patient birthday. Okay, let's run that and see what we get. And as you see, Excel extracts the year. Let's declare another variable for current year. Let's comment out this code and let's set the current year using Excel's year function and passing in Excel's date function. So now we have the current year. Let's also get the patient's year of birth. Patient year of birth will be equal to, we'll use the year function again and we'll pass in the patient birthday. So now we can calculate age. We can say age is equal to current year minus patient's year of birth. We can display the age in a message box. Let's run that, and we get an age of 50. Next, let's look at Excel's hour function. And again, same as day, month, and year, the hour function extracts the current hour. Let's see how we use that. Let's declare a variable for an appointment. Let's declare another variable for the appointment hour. Let's say the appointment was set for 12 to 12, 2020 at 13:30 hours. In that case, appointment hour will be equal to, we use the hour function and we pass in appointments. And we can use a message box to display the appointment hour. Let's run that and see what that looks like. And we get 13 derived from our appointment time. Next, let's take a look at the minute function. As with the hour function, the minute function extracts the minute from a given entry. Let's see how we use that. Let's declare a variable for a planned clinic time. Let's set that variable equal to that date and time. Let's use Excel's minute function to extract the minutes from that planned clinic date and time. We'll display it in a message box. So we're using Excel's minute function and we're passing in the planned clinic date and time. And if we run that, we get the minutes of the clinic. Next, let's look at the seconds function. Again, similar to hours and minutes, the second function returns the seconds from a date and time string. Let's declare a variable for planned clinic. And let's copy this planned clinic date and time. And we can display the actual seconds of that clinic using Excel second function. Okay, let's run that and see what that looks like. And we get 0 for the 0 at the end of the time string. The second, minute, and hour function all depend on the fact that what you pass in is a valid date and time string. So it has to be a valid date and time string for these functions to work. Next, let's look at the dateDiff function. The dateDiff function works out the difference in date and time between two given date entries, and what it displays back depends on what you've asked for in terms of whether you want it in years, days, minutes, seconds, etc. Let's have a look at how this works. Let's declare a variable for patient date of birth. Let's declare a variable for age. And let's declare a variable for today's date. Let's set patient date of birth equal to 1st of January 1970. Let's set today using the date function. We can display the difference between these two dates in a message box using the dateDiff function. So dateDiff expects you to enter an interval type. In this case, I want my interval to be in years, so I enter Y 4 times to represent a 4-character year string. I then enter the start date, which in my case is my patient date of birth, and an end date, which in my case is my today variable. And I format my message box to say age in years. So I've got today's date in my today variable, and I've got the patient date of birth in the patient date of birth variable. And I'm using dateDiff function, and I'm saying I want to see the difference in years between the date of birth and today's date. Let's run that and see what it looks like. And in this case, the difference between 1970 and today's date is 50 in years. Now, I did say what the dateDiff function returns depends on the string you enter as the format you want to see the dateDiff in. Let's look at some other examples of how we can use dateDiff. Let's comment out this code. And let's have a scenario in which we are in a laboratory and we're receiving samples, and it's critical for us to know the difference between the date bled and the date received. So let's declare a variable for the time the sample was bled. And let's declare another variable for the time the sample was received. And finally, let's declare a variable for the time the sample was tested. Let's set some of these variables. So my sample was bled on the 11th of the 11th at 9 a.m. It was received that same day at around 2:45 p.m. Let's use our dateDiff function to calculate the difference between some of these dates. and we'll display that in the message box as normal. So first, I want to see the difference in hours between the sample being bled and the sample being received. Okay, so I want to see the date diff in hours between the sample being bled and the sample being received. And I'll title my message box hours since bled. Let's run that and see what we get. And here we get 5 hours since it was bled. Let's see that in minutes. I'll copy this and comment it out and paste it below. And instead of hours, I will use N for minutes. Sorry, M was taken up for month. So N for minutes. Let's run this and see what we get. And it's 345 minutes since the sample was bled. Let's see that in seconds. Copy that, comment it out, paste it below. And I'll put S for seconds, and I'll say seconds since bled. If we run that, we get 20,730 seconds. Let's comment this out. And let's see. Next, I want to calculate the difference in months, so I'll put M between the sample being received and sample being tested. And this is now months since received. So I've changed my return format to month, and I want to see the difference in month between the sample received and the sample tested. And I get 1 month. Let's copy this, comment it out, and let's see the difference in days. Okay, let's run this. And it's 31 days. Finally, let's copy this, comment it out, and paste it below. And this time, let's see the difference in weeks. And for weeks, we use WW. Okay, let's run that. And this time we get 4 weeks. So the date diff works out the difference between 2 dates, and what it returns depends on what string you enter as your return format. So it can be years, months, days, weeks, hours, minutes, seconds. Finally, let's take a look at the date add function. The date add function adds a time period to a given date, and the time period that it adds depends on the format that you tell it. Let's demonstrate that. Say we have a scenario where we want to put patients onto a transplant waiting list. Let's declare a variable, date on transplant waiting list as date. Let's declare a variable for projected transplant date. Let's set our date of transplant waiting list to be equal to 11/11/2020. So the projected transplant date for most people tends to be around 2 years after being added to the transplant waiting list. So let's use our date add function, date add, and date add expects you to put an interval. So in this case, I'm going to put 4 Ys for year, And then it asks what you want to add. So I want to add 2. And what do I want to add it to? I want to add it to the date on transplant waiting list. So I'm using my date add function to add 2 years to my date on transplant waiting list. Then I can display this. Okay, let's run that and see what we get. So the date on the waiting list is 11/11/2020, and the projected transplant date is 11/11/2022. Now, how quickly you get transplanted does depend to some extent on your ethnicity. So let's declare a variable as integer. And let's comment out this code. So before we determine the projected transplant date, let's ask the user their ethnicity. Now we know patients from Black and African American backgrounds wait on average 3.5 years for a transplant from the dates they were added to the transplant waiting list. For all other ethnicities, it is on average 2 years and 4 months. So let's see how we can use that information. First, we need to ask the user, are they Black or African American? Let's use a message box to do that. We'll use a VB yes/no button. And if they answer yes, then we want to do one calculation, else we want to do a different calculation. And what we want to do if they answer yes is we want to add 3 years and 6 months. One way to do that is to first add 3 years, and then having added 3 years to the transplant waiting list to get the projected transplant date, we add a further 6 months to the transplant date. So first we add 3 years to the transplant waiting list to get the projected transplant date, and then we add a further 6 months to that projected transplant date to get the actual projected transplant date if the question is answered yes. For all other ethnicities, we add 2 years and 4 months. So with that, we can display projected transplant date. Okay, let's run that and see what we get. So are you Black or African American? And if I say yes, then my transplant date is in 2024. If I had said no, my transplant date will be in 2023, projected. So we've had a quick look at some of the more commonly used date functions. These date functions help us to calculate dates and times and differences between dates and times, something which is really important in the clinic. So I hope you find this interesting and useful, and I hope you complete the exercises and you've been able to follow along. See you in the next video.